Before we get into the episode, please could you do me a favour and hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you're listening to the podcast. You'll be actively helping our community to grow and for us to reach more people, and it allows us to get great new guests on for future episodes.
Art versus the algorithm with Will Preisner.
Welcome to episode 9 of Art versus the Algorithm. I'm your host, Will Preisner, and in this episode, I'm joined by Thomas Holm, a highly acclaimed photographer known for his captivating fine art nude imagery. Thomas takes us through his artistic evolution, from getting his first camera as a teenager to mastering commercial photography, and ultimately finding his distinct creative voice by shooting art nudes. Together, we explore Thomas's passion for using natural light, the importance of authentic connections with models, and how pushing creative boundaries fuels his work. We'll also dive into his philosophy that photography is about creating pictures that tell stories, not just capturing moments, and why understanding light and composition matters more than gear. By listening to this episode, you'll gain insights into finding your unique artistic voice, the psychology behind evoking genuine emotion in photographs, and why trust and respect on set are essential to producing truly memorable images. Before we get started, I want to announce that I'm currently working on a live photography event in the next few weeks using the app LiveStage, and you'll be able to take part in that event for free. I'll be shooting with the stunning model Pink Unicorn in Lisbon, in Portugal, and you can see some of our work together in my portfolio and on Instagram. Make sure that you're following my Instagram at Will Preisner to stay up to date with that, and there's a link to that in the podcast description. So, without further ado, let's get on to episode 9 with Thomas Holm. Can you describe to me in your own words the sort of artwork and photography that you produce?
Yes, I mainly create fine art nudes. Sometimes it verges a little bit more towards the erotic side. Sometimes it verges more on the edgy side, but it kind of depends on my interest and what I do and how I work with the models I work with. I kind of need to have a mutual interest to produce something that's really good. So it depends on where I am and what I do.
And can you take me back to the first catalyst for you wanting to become a photographer and what got you started on this journey?
I think my dad eventually, once way back in time, was like an avid photo amateur, but didn't really have time to delve into that. So I inherited a camera when I was 14, 15. Didn't do much with it. Then I started like on an evening school where there was darkroom, and basically I was hooked. The thing about photographing a moment and developing that, making a print and see that sort of emerge in the developer, that I was totally hooked. The ability to freeze like a frame and just a moment in time really, and have that pop out, be able to show people how that looked, that was amazing. I fairly quickly transitioned into what I turned out to be my advertising things, because we had like mini competitions at this evening school, and one of them was nature. My dad was a hunter, so I borrowed the stuffed fox, placed that in nature, and showed that, and everybody thought that was super amazing. And looking back, I saw that I'm much more about creating pictures than taking what's presented for me. I want an active involvement in things. But that's basically what started my interest.
Why do you think that you want an active involvement instead of being a bit more fly on the wall, watching what happens and documenting that?
I'm too much of a control freak. I want things to look in a specific way to radiate the emotion I would like to put forward in the pictures I do. And it's been like that since I started doing advertising. Only in advertising, you can't really do that much. You more work from a brief and a demographic and whatever you want to sell. But I want to control what I do. And stuff like street photography, I've tried it. It's not my thing. It's too reactive, too responsive. I've met the people who can do it, but it's just not my thing. I create pictures more than I take pictures, for sure.
And you mentioned that you were previously a professional commercial photographer. Why did you decide to move on from that and transition into shooting art nude photography?
I was pretty good at it. Had a really good business. I shot international campaigns. It's been shown on various continents and stuff. I've ticked all those boxes of sort of achievement. But in the end, I got bored with it. It's just the thing about selling things, having to work based on a demographic, having to create something because you need to sell something, whatever the product may be, to a certain group of people, was great for a while. It became a job. I was good at it. I just didn't really appreciate it much anymore.
Do you find that also in your art nude work, in your photography, like the photography that you're doing as a commercial photography? Do you find that that presents new challenges continually to keep you engaged?
Definitely. Things are different depending on who I work with and environment I work in, for sure. But yes, if it's not challenging, I won't do it. I constantly sort of strive to keep myself on my toes. My preferred thing to shoot with is daylight because it's transient. It's super hard to control, but it also gives some magic things that you can usually never recreate. If I work in the studio, I will do anything I can to do something different from all the other times I've done it. I want to try and challenge myself to discover new ways of doing it. I mean, I can make 20 light setups look awesome, but if I just do that every time, then the pictures will also be like a little bit run-of-the-mill, and I get bored with that. I need to feel that there's at least an opportunity to create something new. But the other thing that really has my keen interest is when you photograph art nudes, you also work with a person. And that person has interests, a personality, they have certain views on life. And I kind of want to try and get that across, at least one little slice of who that person is. Because having archetypical thing when you shoot nudes are stuff like Playboy or Med Art or whatever. There's so much of that, which is like soft porn or whatever. No problem with that from my side. But the problem is that it is created to sort of stir a sexual tension in whoever views it and kind of disregard the personality of the people that you photograph. I want to sort of draw out the specialties, the uniqueness of every single person. And if I get a little bit of their sort of personality into that, then I feel we create something which is unique for how they were feeling that day and how I was feeling that day and the circumstances we're in. And then that keeps adding new varieties of what we do. I'm really interested in psychology. I'm really interested in what motivates people to do what they do. You're a photographer yourself, and so am I. And we photograph these models. They look amazing. But sometimes you wonder, why do they do it? What's in it for them? And throughout art history, there's been a lot of naked women, so it's not just that. But what's in it for the women? Yes, some of them make money on it, but it's not something you really make a great living on. So I'm really interested in figuring out what motivates these people to go do what they do. And I find that intriguing as well, because that also draws out some of the reasons why a lot of women like what I do. Whereas there are nudes and there are nudes, basically, but there's a difference between what women like and what men like in general. And a lot of women seems to really like what I do. And I guess that's because I have that keen interest in their motivation and hopefully have an understanding about that. And I can sort of introduce some of that into my pictures.
I read a quote on your website where you said, "These days I prefer to make images that evoke emotion and touch people in a deeper way." Why do you prefer that? What does that give to you?
If a photograph or a painting or a sculpture can invoke emotion in you, your brain essentially will linger on that. It will try and draw parallels into past experiences or future dreams or whatever. And that will make it more interesting for the brain to sort of engage with that picture. Our brain is a very energy-hungry device. It takes about 20% of our daily intake of calories just for the brain to function. That means the brain will categorize things. It will make sure that it uses as little energy as possible on whatever it can do. Which means that if you look at a picture like regular porn picture, something, the brain looks at that, it will possibly get sexually stimulated, but it's not going to think much further about it because that's not the point. So there's no point in spending or expending energy. That means you need to take up more calories. From an evolutionary point of view, that would make sense. However, if something feels dangerous or something evokes emotions or memories that you might need to take into account, you will spend longer time and have a deeper interest in a picture. And I have a little personal rule that I've sort of figured out. My goal when I create pictures is to gain people's attention for 3 seconds. And that doesn't sound like much, but the average time people look at a picture in a museum worldwide is about 8 seconds, which is not a lot when you think about how many pictures are in a museum. But that's sort of the average when you walk by. I thrive on various mediums like Purple Port or Instagram. And when you scroll on Instagram, I will venture a bet that most people use less than 1 second watching each picture they scroll past while it's moving across the screen. So getting somebody's attention for 3 seconds is really a win in that respect. That requires you to actually stop, go back, look at that. Maybe your brain will do a little something on it, but there's a much larger chance that you're going to remember that picture. And I mean, who wants to create pictures that nobody will remember 10 seconds after you scroll past them on Instagram? I don't think anybody did. So I find that emotion is one of the things that make pictures interesting. So if you look at portraits, you have to have something to engage with. So if I made a picture of Al Pacino and my dad, you would default to Al Pacino because he's known. But if all I had was my dad, I need to make that picture into something that you would engage with. You need to feel something when you see it, which is why most people, when they do portraits, love to shoot like old fishermen or naked women to take like an easy way, because that also short circuits the brain a little bit. But I only pretty much shoot nudes, so that's not it. I want to add that extra aspect where people get a sense of emotion or a sense of the model having some kind of experience, which hopefully will make them think what happens or happened at that moment when we took the picture. And again, by extension, that will give me more time, or give them more time to actually view my pictures, which means there's a larger chance of them actually engaging with it and thus remembering it.
Do you have like a sort of playbook for going about that, evoking that emotion, or is it something that you kind of organically create as you're going about each shoot?
Sometimes when you come across somebody who posts pictures from a shoot where they post, 50 pictures, you really easily get bored of that. But the thing is, when you look at those pictures, maybe one or two of them are actually good. Maybe one or two of them give you that sense of emotion. But by posting all the other ones, they get lost in the flow of crap, or not crap, but not good, not excellent. And I would much rather pick out and create the very few excellent pictures and just post one or two great pictures from a shoot, which is the one that engaged me the most or makes me wonder or whatever. So when I create the pictures, it's not like I have any kind of playbook, because also there's some psychology in regard to the model and how we go about. But one thing I do is I really try and get to learn the model. Having a coffee, a chat, whatever, can easily be for an hour and a half before we start shooting. I'm not super eager on starting to shoot. I want to bond with them and learn who they are and what their lives is like, because that will give me more of a feel for who they are as a person. And that gives me ideas into what kind of emotion could work with them. So I think that's my main playbook. Try and get to know the people I photograph and figure out who they are. I will also, while we do that, of course, study them, figure out how their facial expressions works, how they smile, what they do, and discover things about their life, because I'm generally interested in other people's lives.
Do you think there's anything in your past or your childhood that's kind of influenced that interest in people, as well as your decision to work with the human form and nudity?
I'm teaching at sort of workshops, and I really like to dive into creativity. And one of the ways of figuring out who I am is to go in and figure out what I like. And some of the things I really like is my dad's an architect. So I've been exposed to a lot of buildings. I've been also exposed to a lot of really nice furniture, stuff like that. And I appreciate really nicely designed things, something with proportions, something with shapes. That also, by extension, goes to lighting. And there's a lot of other things there. It's probably a little heavy to go into this because it usually takes me about a day to get it across. But basically, once you make that list of who you are, and you have to be like brutally honest, you get a feel for what you really like in life. And if you do photography right, your photography will be a reflection of that list. It will be a reflection of who you basically are. And once you get to that point, the things you photograph will be pretty unique. Whereas what I see a lot in a lot of photographers is that they find a great picture and say, oh, let's use this for inspiration. And they pick that up and they basically duplicate the picture. Sometimes they even go as far as book the same model as was used for the inspiration picture, and then they recreate it. And then, of course, yes, they can recreate a picture. So that means they can make a copy of a certain picture. That's great for learning the technical aspects, assuming you understand how that is. But if the goal is that you want to become good at light, or you want to understand why a certain composition works and why another one didn't, that's a fine goal. So how do you avoid making a copy? If you figure out what you uniquely like, so what are your interests in life? How is your view on everything? And you try and imbue that when you take the pictures, make sure that the aesthetics of the picture you create follow along those lines. And when you do the culling of the pictures, you select the pictures that tick most of the boxes on your "this is me" list. Then you're going to have pictures that will be a truer representation of who you are as a person. And they will basically be more pleasing to you. And I think that's the main thing when you create pictures. We need to create something that will, when I create something, I need to satisfy me. I don't need to satisfy anybody else. I don't really care whether anybody else likes it. Of course I care. But if I direct the way of creating into something that I think will be more popular, then I'm basically telling myself, oh, you shouldn't be Thomas. You should be somebody else who's apparently more popular than I am. But they have a different background. They have different likes in life. So my only sort of chance of creating something that's original, something that's unique, is by being myself. And that's something you have to work on and being and figuring out what you like in life, basically.
I think that's really great practical steps to try and find your voice in photography. And I'm sure it also would be relevant to other art forms too. And I think a lot of photographers see as well good photography, one of the steps to get in there being good equipment and investing all your money in great equipment. And I just kind of wondered from your perspective, to what extent the best equipment and equipment in general plays into making good photos.
I mean, if you give me a point and shoot camera, I can still make great pictures. It doesn't matter. I've just done a couple of workshops in Lanzarote, and after the workshops, we had a day. I had my mind elsewhere, but I was shooting with a couple of models, and I forgot my proper lens. I usually, when I go locations, I shoot with a 24-70 lens, and I didn't bring it. And I'm like, fuck. Okay, I'm here with 3 models. We are away for a day. I can't really go back and fetch it because the place we're shooting would have a lot of tourists coming shortly. So I had a 16-35 lens, and you're like, okay, then you adapt whatever you do to suit that. That creates different pictures. Also, I had a Polaroid camera, so we shot some Polaroids. Camera has no bearing. Of course, if you want something, there's certain lenses that will give you special effects if you need like a special bokeh or something. But all that, not even the 2080, we are in the 595 points. Composition and lighting is what makes the thing. So buying a Leica kit and a Noctilus lens, which is, I don't know, 10,000 pounds or something, will not make you a better photographer. But learning how light interacts with a face or a body will make you a better photographer. So I post very little value to things as being important for photography. I think the main thing we all have is our cultural heritage, the way we look at life, and our understanding of life and composition. I think that's the main thing we have. And a lot of people ask me about a lot of things like, what's your camera and all that stuff. And I usually say camera is just like a frying pan. So if you go to a restaurant, you have a great steak, you go to the chef, says, oh, what frying pan did you use to fry this amazing steak? And you'd be like, idiot, because it's not the frying pan that fried the steak. It's basically the guy holding the frying pan. And it's the same with the camera. It doesn't really matter whether you have one tool or another. If you build a house, it doesn't matter what like a power drill the carpenter had who did it. That's not the point. The point is how you put things together and how you make the installation work and all that stuff. So it's the knowledge behind creating the picture that's the important thing. I really feel strongly about this. So when people ask me what kind of light and light modifier should I get, I usually say you should get like a black styrofoam plate. And they're like, wait, what? But should I use Broncolor or whatever? Just get a black styrofoam plate. Because if you look at the light on me right now, just as a super quick example, I have like a window on one side there. I have some ceiling light. And the lighting is not very pleasing. There's a little bit too much light. So if I take this notebook and I hold this up on this side of my face, then I have much better lighting on my face because I don't have the incident reflection from the wall, which is right next to me. So having something to be able to direct light and make sure you don't have the light that otherwise have is the best light modifier you can have. And that could be like a 3 by 6 foot styrofoam plate. It could be like a fold up thing. It doesn't really matter, but that's the most important thing you can do. If you want a lamp, go to, I don't know, your own local Home Depot or do it yourself shop and buy like a building construction lamp. You can take pictures of that on a sheet, but you need the black plate. You need something very simple. But it's more about knowing how to use these things that important than what you actually have in regard to equipment. And initially, when I started shooting nudes, I had a company with one of my colleagues, and we had some Canon 5Ds and amazing lenses and stuff, but they're really big, really chunky, and I didn't really want to use them. I did a lot of traveling. I needed something to bring on my travels. So I bought a Sony NEX7, which is like a 300-pound camera, including a kit lens. And then I bought a 200 pounds 50mm 1.8, which is equivalent to about 75, 80 millimeters because it was an APS-C camera. And I shot my entire first book on that. So it's a 24 megapixel camera. It's called The Graces, amazing book. And all the quality is fine. And it's with a camera totaling 500 quid, including lenses.
I've seen more value myself in, understanding that closing the curtains can sometimes make an image look better versus spending £1,000 on a piece of equipment. Sometimes you don't need to spend anything, or you can spend very little to just improve the overall look, and being educated and focusing on education so that you can take it into your practice.
At some point, usually when I get annoyed about something, I try and do something about it. So I've had so many, not run-ins, but so many discussions on various photo forums with people who show you these elaborate full lamp setups of how to light something, and you need to use a clamshell lighting and whatever stuff. And usually these are done by people who need to get views on YouTube or by photo manufacturers who want to sell more kit, which I understand. That's commercial. I totally understand where it comes from. So I got sufficiently annoyed, and I decided to make like an online course, video course on how to photograph using one lamp. And I did 7, 8 setups and did a lot of examples of different modifiers on that. And case in point, for 95% of everything I do, I use one lamp. I don't need more because I know how to control the one lamp I have. And you can do different things, but it's just getting to know it. So when you sell stuff, you have to have some reviews. So I asked some of the guys who were like the early adopters and buyers, can you tell me what you think about them? Let's have some testimonials or whatever. And one of the guys said he usually used 6 or 7 lamps when he was shooting. And he discovered, he did this course. First, he basically thought it was BS. But then he discovered that he could actually do better lighting with one lamp. And he had thought he'd need to go out and buy 2, 3 more lamps to sort of get the result that he's seen from some Playboy setters and stuff like that. And the point is, the simpler you make things, the better they work. I mean, back in the day when I did my apprenticeship and stuff, we talked a lot about there's only one sun and there should only be one light and stuff like that. And that's a natural way of seeing things. And we are accustomed to having one light, and that generally looks good to us. There's no problem in using other lamps if you have a reason to doing them. But people tend to overcomplicate things because they like to put up gear. They need to have all this special equipment, and they need to have some snoods, and they need to have some honeycombs, and they need to have this and that. And in general, I just don't find it's necessary. When you do things right, if you use one lamp, you can accomplish almost anything. I would much rather have one lamp and have like 2, 3 flags or V-flats or styrofoam plates to remove the light from those areas where I don't want the light to be, because you can create much more emotive things and things that are looking much more interesting if you have one light. The other thing is, it's much faster working that way. Imagine having to set up 6 and 7 lights. The model moves like, I don't know, half a feet. That would be ridiculous. Move 2, 3, 4 inches to one side, and you will have something completely different. If you have one lamp, you only have one thing to adjust. If the model moves, you move that one lamp, and that's it. It doesn't complicate things. It makes things easier. And I really like to spend the time when I'm photographing not tinkering with buttons and programs and stuff like that. I always shoot manual. I always shoot manual on the flash when I use Studio Flash. It's just the easier I can have things, the more time I can spend working with the model and actually looking at the picture, not worrying about whether my lamp 3 said beep and went off or didn't or whatever.
And you place more value and get more out of it when you put your focus on the model and less on the tech and less on the equipment.
Yeah, I can tell you it's a comment I have very frequently from models, that they like that I'm not hung up on equipment. A lot of photographers seem hell-bent on explaining to every model they work with how many lenses they have and how much money they spend on the equipment and what their flash can do in interval timings and how they can freeze the moment and stuff. I know the models, frankly, doesn't give a shit. They want nice pictures, and how you accomplish them doesn't really matter. It's kind of like if you watch Formula One and you want Lewis Hamilton to explain you how the fuel injection on something works when the temperature is below this and that. Those are very esoteric and very interesting things for a select few amount of people, but the models are not any of them. And if you start boring the model with your technology instead of spending time interacting with them, you will have a little bit bored, distracted look, because how can they keep attention on something that really bores them intently? And I think that's the psychology part that many people miss.
So you mainly shoot with women in your art nude work. What is it about women that makes you want to shoot them?
I love women. I mean, I'm a guy. I'm heterosexual. I'm attracted to women. I love the naked body. I think it's super beautiful. And obviously, I have an interest in women in general. The other thing is, I cherish to have the difference in perspective from my own life. I mean, I'm a middle-aged guy. I'm 57. I have a certain view on life based on my cultural background and upbringing and work and all that stuff. It's amazing to me to learn new perspectives, to figure out how does other parts of the world see the world. And I mean, mic drop, 20, 25-year-old women have a complete different outlook on life and the world than I do. And I really like to hear that view and sometimes understand why my perception of a lot of things were wrong before. I love to have my sort of opinion changed. And young women is not completely opposite to what I am, but they are sufficiently different in view of life on how I see things. And I really like the interaction and understanding where they are, where they come from.
But you're interested in people, essentially. Part of the process is like discovering this. I can definitely relate to that. There's a people watching element to it for me, and understanding on a deeper level who someone is. I find that photography allows me to understand the other person on a much deeper level, much quicker than if I was sometimes if I was just sitting talking to them. It allows you to kind of open up to each other, and that's really rewarding.
When you shoot nudes of pretty much any kind, you also very quickly get a much more intimate conversation, because at the point where you have a subject in who are nude, pretty much all pretense of who you are and what you like and what you like to project goes away. You kind of drop the veil a little bit, which means that you much faster get to some real conversations on what happens. And I really appreciate that. I mean, I'm not really into small talk, oh, how's the weather? Oh, it's fine. And yeah, we're doing great and all that. I would much rather hear that you have an oncoming depression and you think it might be because of this or that, or that you have problems. I have ADHD myself. And I would much rather talk about the difficulties people have in life and how they overcome challenges in stuff like that. Because it's a much more real conversation than just this superficial stuff about, oh, work is great, I make a lot of money, all that stuff. That doesn't really interest me. I want to know about how people really feel and what they really are and what motivates them to do different things.
I've noticed as well that you experiment and push boundaries with very expressive and quite experimental art nude poses that kind of seem to test the model's balance and flexibility, as well as shooting beautifully sculptural poses. Some of them are very erotic, and yet you uniquely seem to stay kind of tasteful in ways that other photographers try similarly but fail. For example, I've seen you achieve this on a few occasions while shooting with a model posing with open leg, for example. Like, how do you go about achieving this kind of tasteful eroticism? Something that has kind of these tropes that is synonymous with explicit imagery, but remaining tasteful still. How do you go about doing that?
From what I do is just shooting something explicit is not a goal for me. It makes no sense. I mean, I like naked women, but what I like to do in that genre is if I have a model who have the interest, and that's also the way I bring it up. I don't mind asking women to say or tell them that I have an interest in doing erotic pictures if they feel like it. So if they're in the mood and they feel comfortable and whatever, and they want to do it, I'm totally up for that. But I'm interested in the eroticism part. I'm interested in how you can create something intimate. And I think it's all about definitions. If you look at something like porn to me is in many cases, I'm going to like generalize a little, but it's in most cases, it is made for sexual gratification in the story. It's made so you can masturbate or you can have sex to it and you get inspired by whatever, something going on because it feels easier. I don't really have any interest in that because, I mean, I watch porn, no problem with that. If porn has its functions, great for that. It's just not what I want to create. I want to create stuff that feels more authentic, like if you kind of have an encounter with somebody and you get into that intimate moment where you are actually led into a woman's universe. And for some women, that can be very erotic and very explicit. For other people, it can be very secluded or very elegant. And again, this is where the personality of the woman comes in. If they feel open enough and are interested in creating the stuff like we do it, then you can create something that has like an authentic feel to it. And I think that's the key for me, because just shooting somebody with open legs or somebody masturbating, I don't really have an interest in that. I want to evoke the feeling that you are led into a private moment and you get to experience something that's rare or that's personal. I think this is where the interesting thing in pictures start. I also obviously have a voyeuristic tendency. I think most photographers who are good photographers have that. They like to watch and see things. But I also feel that if somebody strips naked and stands on a white background, there's nothing sexy about that to me. But if you walk past like a dressing room in a department store and you see a glimpse of somebody, not even necessarily naked, but something you're not necessarily supposed to see, that's much more exciting. And I also like that aspect. If you can imbue like maybe a little bit of voyeurism and make it a little bit forbidden, that also gives you that feeling that this is interesting because it's not something I'd see normally. I'm led into, or I'm giving an opportunity to watch something that's interesting or private somehow.
When I spoke to Eowyn, who I know you've shot with, Eowyn Luna, she commented on your ability to shoot tastefully and with a sort of sense of control and that you've got over your images. And that kind of helped her in wanting to work with you as well as feeling specifically comfortable with you versus other photographers that she's worked with. Hearing this and also during my research, your skill in directing models and your ability to make them feel comfortable around you came up a few times. Can you elaborate on this? Is it something that you feel like is innate in you as a person, or is it something you've learned over time, or a combination of the two?
I've definitely learned it over time. But I mean, my background, again, commercial photography, back in the day, I shot on advertising, which is like you put something in Daily Mail or whatever. If you want to shoot some ads for that, there's basically a very limited budget because it's something going out one time, that's it. So if you have a local store or somebody selling sweaters, you will get somebody in, and that somebody would usually be somebody who worked as a clerk in the store, which means people that look good but have no experience. And basically, back then, we shot on Hasselblad, which means you have 12 pictures to make do. If you do another film, you will basically increase the cost of the price of the thing. So you need to be really good at making sure you get what you want fairly fast. Digital now, I can easily shoot 2,000-3,000 pictures in a day. But back then, if for one shot, for one advertising, you try and constrict 12 clicks on the shutter. So you need to make sure you know what you want. And that's one aspect, of course. But it also means that you kind of become good at having people relax in front of the camera. And once you've done it for a long time, it becomes second nature. I think one of the things I do is I never fret on anything. Having technical problems happen for everybody. And I had a shot the other day where I should tether that into the camera. Every time I shot 12, 15 pictures, it will stop transferring pictures to the computer. And the way I use it normally when I shoot is I shoot something, we shoot some series, we look over the pictures and go on. So not having them transfer is a problem. The other thing is when it doesn't transfer, the camera actually won't let me shoot because the buffer gets filled. So imagine somebody yells stop every time you've been shooting for like 2 minutes. It's super annoying. Couldn't figure out what the problem was. Turned out to be a cable. But I discovered that the next day. But we had that, 15, 20 times a day in the time we shot. And it's super annoying, but I'm like, okay, there's some technical stuff and that happens. I don't panic over it. I never panic. And people like that. They like that you're just calm and things go on. The other thing I've noticed is that I have no problem spending as much time setting up anything. And usually I don't start anything before the model arrives. So if somebody comes to the studio, I'll make sure there's coffee or tea or whatever. And usually we're going to start talking. I don't have any lights set up. I have a couple of sets I can fairly easily build, but I don't start anything because I kind of want to have a feel for the model and figure out where they are before I decide what to do. That's also one of the ways I do of keeping things new. But then I can spend like 30, 40 minutes setting things up, adjusting light, doing things, changing things until I have the perfect picture. And nobody has a problem with that. Because once I have a really good setup, they can see, okay, this is the basis for a really good picture. It's fine. Where a lot of photographers have this idea that they need to be able to set everything up really fast. So they're going to start photographing before the set is good, before the lighting really works. And then they have the idea that they're probably going to fix it afterwards or during the shoot or whatever. But what it also means is that when the models see the first shots, whether it's the back of the camera or whatever, they have this not really good. It doesn't matter for a model how long time you take to set up. If most models get 1-2 good shots, even from a day shoot, but they're really good, it's fine. Everybody's happy. That's not a problem. Nobody wants 100 shot shots or 10 mediocre shots because that's run of the mill. Everybody can do that. It's the rare, really good shots that matter. So it doesn't matter how long time you take. So being really calm in that respect, and I can set things up, I can shoot, I try and explain the process, explain how I want them to pose. I have no problem showing them how to pose myself if I want that. But most of the time, what I do is, if it's somebody who's used to modeling, I'm going to sort of put them somewhere. It could be on a box, it could be in a sofa, daylight, doesn't really matter. I'm going to, let's call it, build a little set up some light, get that to work. Then I'm going to ask them to just freestyle, just do things. And I'm just going to shoot away, have them do different things. At some point, I find something I like, my brain chucks into gear, and I say, okay, there's something in this that can start working. Then I'm going to start to micromanage it, because then I might have this 80% good shot, but then I want it to be 100 or as close to 100 I can get. And then I'm going to start to micromanage everything, go back to that. Another way I like to work is I just shoot 50, 60, 100 pictures initially, do a couple different things, bring the model over to the computer, look over the pictures, and then I'm going to star mark the ones I really like. So that might be 3-4 poses I like. And then we're going to go, okay, with the best of those poses, which is that? And find something where I can get the model on board of that as well. And we're going to redo that pose. We're going to start with that. And then we're going to try and fine tune that and get it to become really good. You could say it's time intensive initially, but it gives a great confidence for the model in the photographer, because they see that you are working towards a goal. They don't know what the goal is, but they know when they see it. They know that now we have something that really works here. And that makes it interesting for them, because it's kind of like when you dangle, let's call it the prize. You have the little metal thing that means this is a really good picture. When you can dangle that in front of them, they go like, okay, I can see we're really onto something here. They are also willing to go the extra mile and really put in the effort and do the hard poses if they need to. Whereas if they see something with mediocre lighting, they're going to be like, is it really worth doing that handstand and trying, because they know it's going to be shit anyway. So that means something. Another thing in regard to models is to make sure that they feel safe. And that means it's an employee-employer relationship you have to have with them. You can be cordial, whatever, but they are in a workplace and you're in a workplace, and you have to behave that way. So you need to make sure that everybody's comfortable. You need to make sure they don't misunderstand things. Let's say we're doing something, have this setup thing, somebody's sitting on a chair, leaning forward, hair doesn't really work. I'm going to try and have them fix the hair, but fixing the hair while you're leaning forward, doing something can be super hard. Then I'm going to say, okay, do you mind if I adjust your hair this? And if they say no, I won't do it. If they say, no, that's fine, cool, do it. I'll do it. Then I'm going to take a picture. I'm going to show them what the effect of that is. And usually they're like, okay, that makes total sense. And then it becomes easier to sort of get to the point where they are not afraid of me touching them, because I will never touch them unless I'm allowed to do it. And I'm going to ask every time I can do it. I try and do everything with humor. That also helps to deflect something. But usually, sometimes when you shoot with new models, they can be like really, really timid initially, but it usually takes 10, 15 minutes and then they are naked and they love it. And then that's it. But then we are beyond that stage of them being timid anymore. And again, one of the things I do purposely is, even though somebody is naked and we're having a conversation, having a coffee or whatever, I look them in the eyes. I don't look at their boobs. I don't look at their ass or whatever. And women know where you look when you look at them. And then what happens sometimes is I didn't even realize I was naked and been sitting there for 15 minutes and having a tea. And just because we're having normal conversation, I'm not different to them in any way because they're naked than they are if they are fully clothed. It doesn't really make any difference to me. And I make a point of making that come across. I think that also helps.
Yeah, I mean, I've also noticed as well that you're like one of few photographers that creates art nude work with large groups of models. Like I saw a set where recently that you posted with 9 models all posing nude on their tiptoes in a studio. And I imagine this is such a logistical challenge to direct and work with so many people at once and organize the shoot and get everyone there together on time. How do you go about approaching these shoots, and why did you choose to start shooting with more than one model?
Challenge for sure. I've done groups with like 2 or 3 people before, and I think that's, if not common, it's not uncommon at least. At some point, I think this was pre-COVID, I went to the US. I've been a lot to the US. I've shot my latest book, Venus on Mars, there. So I've been a lot to the US. And on one of those trips, I had some days where I wanted to go to LA. I was working with some models there. And then I thought, it could be fun to see if I could actually pull together a group shoot, just to see if I can do it. So I contacted a company called Arsenic, which is like a PR agency back in the day, and says, hey, listen, I'd love to shoot your villa, because they allow that for photographers sometimes, for some photographers at least. And they say, that's a great idea. Let's find some models for you. And I'm like, okay, if you offer to do it, that's cool. So they cast some models, great models, 5 of them. And I basically did the first group shoot there. For me, 5 is not like a large group. That's a mediocre something. But it was great. It was super fun. Not hard at all, in my respect, because they were all professionals and super good. So the year after, I came back, and I'm like, can we do that again? But this time I'm just going to do the casting myself. Back then, I had an Instagram with like 130K followers, which is super helpful, of course. And I basically made a casting saying, listen, I'm going to be in LA. I want to cast a large group shoot. We're going to shoot at a private villa. I'm looking for all body types, whatever, ethnicities, skin colors we can do. Something on those lines. And of course, posted some pictures of what I had in mind. And then I had, I think, 13, 14 people respond. They would love to do it. I looked at the women there, and most of them were white or white ethnicity or something close to that. So I basically targeted some specific dark-skinned girls, women of color, that I would love to work with, because I wanted that to be like an all-inclusive shot with a lot of women. So I got some more on board, made some, says, hey, listen, this is going to be great. We're going to have this. Looks like we probably get to 15, 20 people, but I would love to have some more women of color, and then wrote to some of them. And we ended up having, I think, a confirmed base of 18 or 19 or something, that people who wanted to come. So we made all the arrangement. Predictably, 2 or 3 of them fell off, but the rest showed up pretty anxious, because it could be something where you have a massive catfight if everybody is fighting for attention. But it didn't happen. It was super nice. I didn't really realize how I went about doing it, but apparently I was good at having everybody calm down. And we made some fantastic shots that day. And that was super cool. We ping-ponged some of the concept first and what we're doing. I've made like a lot of sketches, and you need to have something visual to show people like that, so you can show them the ideas. And we basically created 7, 8 great shots in the span of 5 or 6 hours there. You're absolutely right in that it can be super hard. It can feel like herding cats sometimes, but you need to direct. You can't hint or assume or hope that will not work. You have to sort of direct people and make them believe in the ideas you have, and basically do it. But once you're there, everybody loves to be in large groups, which also means the groups things I do is TFP shoots, and they are because people like to participate in something that's unusual. And again, likely my image also helps because people know that something great will come from it. And then since that time, when you have something to show for it, it's always easier to do. And then I've done 3 more, I think. Did one in the UK where we had 10 models. I've done a couple in Denmark as well, where we have between 15, 16 and 13, 12, something like that. And it's super fun. It's super fun to do things which is otherwise impossible. And I mean, who doesn't want to create the shots that few other people can create? I mean, if anybody in that world I'm envious on, it would be Spencer Tunick, who does these things with like 3, 4, 5,000 people. And they invade the streets of Barcelona or pier or parking lot or an opera house or whatever. And I mean, I would love to do stuff like that, except that's his thing. So if I did something similar, I would basically be doing Spencer Tunick kind of work, which is not that interesting. But I mean, having the opportunity to work with large groups is fantastic. And you can create super fun things. And I love to do that for sure.
You referenced the Venus on Mars book, and I read a quote where you said that the odd thing about something like this is when I work on big projects for a long time, I start doubting myself. I start to wonder if the images are really good or if I should select some other ones or do more editing work, essentially. I just get a big time self-doubt. What is it, do you think, that fuels that self-doubt on a project when you work on like a larger project, for example, rather than a single shoot and a selection of images? Why do you think that starts to creep in?
I mean, I know I have ADHD, and I know a lot of people with ADHD has like imposter syndrome, that you're like, it basically means that you have this feeling that maybe you're not really as good as you think you are. And at some point, some people will discover it's just went. You know on an intellectual level that you are good at what you do, but you always have that little fear that, is this really something special? And the way I work is I create things precisely the way I want to create them. So I make the things, I build the concept, I pull together the things I want to do. That's the excitement of doing it. There's nothing greater than making a big project and ending up fulfilling it, having it printed like a book, if it's a book or an exhibition, and basically being able to show it to the world. But I think it's not unrare that you doubt yourself somewhere in the process. When you work on things, I mean, the Venus and Mars books, I basically spent 2 trips of 1 trip 10 days, 1 trip 2 weeks, with 3 models going around the deserts of Arizona, Utah, Nevada, and New Mexico. Shot maybe 30,000 pictures, frames, and ended up selecting the 130 or something best pictures from that. Or are they the best? Maybe. Who decides who are the best? And there's only basically yourself to do that. But then very often when you create things, you create it, you try and, when you do books or you do exhibitions, you have to sequence things. And it's super important because there's definitely better pictures in the pile of work there than some of the ones in the book. The problem is that if you don't build a coherent sequence, then it will be boring to see. If you have like an skewed collection of things, let's take an example. Let's say we do a project where we have some shots in the forest, some shots on the field, some shots on a beach, just to take some names, and some shots on the rocks. You'd need to have a fairly equal amount of all of them. You can't have 50% of the 4 categories in a beach. That won't work because you're going to have too much beach, so to speak. So you need to find a way of getting that to work. And when you sequence a book, if you say, okay, I have like X amount of pictures on red rocks, okay, that's many more than you have on anything else. Then you're going to have to take some of the great red rock pictures away and put some other stuff instead if you want to do that. Because otherwise, when you sit and live through a book, or if you go to an exhibition and you view it, you're going to have the feeling that, oh, this section is about something else than the rest of it. And a book takes on a different dimension because you have a series of images. So it's not the single images, it's the sum of everything. That means you need to select things in a different way. And of course, that makes you doubt what you do. The other thing is when you work on something for like 4 or 5 years, which is, include the planning, 2 years for shooting it, all the editing, all the layouting, figure out how to put it in and have it printed. It's a very long time for working with the same things. And I tend to get tired of things fairly easily. So if I look at something for a long time, I'm like, I'm done with it. I've been there. I've seen it. It doesn't have the same interest to me. Normally when I work with things, I will take a picture, color it, find the best ones, edit that or a little series. And in principle, the second I'm done editing it, I'm bored because the picture's finished for me now. So I suppose when you do like bigger projects, it's kind of like if you take some musicians who work on an album, they've been working on that music for maybe a couple of years. Then they record it, they master it, put it through all the producers, edits, they find out, okay, this is the perfect way of doing it. And then they fucking have to play that tune for 3 more years when they do concerts all over the world. They've created like 100 songs since then that is much more exciting. But you have to kind of engage with the old stuff, the stuff you've done. But once you've done it, it's not the same excitement anymore. So then you have to sort of force yourself to not do the things you are excited about, but working with things that are basically finished. And then that gives a little skewed opinion because everything new is just more exciting, at least for me. So it's kind of hard to, when you do bigger things, to keep the focus and keep the enthusiasm because you looked at it. I mean, there's not a picture in the book I haven't looked at, I don't know, hundreds of times because I've been doing it. I've edited all of them. I've re-edited some of them because once you sequence them, you figure out, okay, this edits look great. But when you put it on the opposing side of another picture, then the color scheme doesn't really work. There's some difference there, which might be subtle, but you need to change things again. So you sort of fix things up once you have the final sequence. Then I've done all the printing. I've looked at the book so many times and all that. So you get bored with it a little bit because you've been there. I think that's it. It is basically an insecurity about how will something you worked on for that long be received by other people. Will they like it? I was really surprised that it turned out to be so popular as it really was. Really pleasantly surprised.
We're looking for figurative artists, photographers, models, and activists. If you'd like to be a guest on Art versus the Algorithm, reach out to us on our social channels at Art vs Algorithm. And let's chat.
I want to move on to talking about censorship. And I'm just wondering, like, generally, what's your overall view on the state of censorship, both online and offline?
First of all, I think censorship sucks. It sucks because you have a small sample of the whole population who wants to skew what is right and what is not right to sort of suit their view of the world or their commercial interests. So whether censorship is on a political level or whether it's about nudity, which I suppose this is where this podcast more comes in, or whether it's a legal thing, I think is really dangerous because it has profound effects on society. There seems to be a tendency, if we take like the overall thing on a lot of online platforms, and I'm not specific to pictures here, I'm more about what you can say and what you cannot say, where a lot of people have this idea that you have to agree with them and you're not allowed to say certain things. And the real problem in society will happen when we seize the opportunity to be able to discuss things. So if we broach some of the more hard topics like gender roles, you cannot yell out people, you cannot have people not state their opinion, because if you silence people, you're going to run into the problem that works for you to get your point across, but it doesn't work if the opposition or the majority is against your view of the world. So if we skew that debate and says, no, we're not allowed to say that men who transitions to women are women. Let's not say that, because we are a majority of the population who decides that that's the way it is. That will be largely discriminatory. But I find that many of the, let's call them fringe movements, will feel that way, just the opposite direction, because they are minorities. You're not allowed to say things that are opposed to you. And I think that's, in general, a very, very dangerous view of the world. Now, if we take censorship in political terms, we've just had an election in the US where you had Kamala Harris against Trump. There's been so much debate where people just pour dirt on each other and don't really discuss what they're doing in office, but they're basically just trying to silence the other people, either by too much information or by saying you have opinions you're not allowed to have because that's obviously wrong. I think that's a very dangerous step in society. And if we extend that a little bit to Twitter, which I think is a cesspool, especially when we get to political messages, because it's basically just people yelling at each other and making everybody feel horrible. However, Twitter, on the other hand, is one of the few platforms currently that will allow nudity, and it's even in their guidelines that you actually can post nudity or even porn if you want on Twitter, which is something that I find great. There's a couple of comments on that, though. If we look at Meta, Facebook, Instagram, they have very strict policies and, in my opinion, very badly trained AI models currently, because the AI seems to sort of flag all sorts of images which is not against their guidelines. And then it's upon the user to actually contest that removal of pictures and have you go through some hoops and select some specific options to have a human or another AI to look at those pictures in a sensible way and not just reject it, which over time will lead you to be dispelled or have your account deleted. I think that's a horrible policy. And I can't really figure out whether it's currently because they just want to get rid of all people who do anything with nudity, or they have really badly AIs and they train us on that. But that's one point of it. On the flip side, coming from advertising, the main problem between the censorship in pictures and on social media in particular, but also all media, is I think they are afraid of their advertising income and they are afraid of being punished by the card payment providers. So I don't know if you know this, but there's a long-time story that Apple would not allow any things where you could watch nudity on their App Store. And I think there's some truth to that. But then Twitter or X or whatever it's called, X, I guess, clearly has that, and they have no problem with peddling their app through the App Store. So perhaps it's because Elon Musk, who runs it, and perhaps he's too large to shut down, but a lot of other apps and companies who do things cannot make apps because if they contain nudity, it will be a problem for them. So there's some truth in that. But I think the main problem is the Foster-Sester rule, so law that was passed 5-6 years ago in the US, which basically was made to limit sex trafficking. But they passed a law which probably is very badly written that did hurt a lot of sex workers because they could not vet people online because a lot of things with nudity online or things that could lead to prostitution was not allowed online. But I think the main travesty in that law is that they put out of play, in regards to sex trafficking, the old rule that the internet had, that basically the platforms were not responsible for things users posted on the platforms. 518 something sequence. And basically that's the only reason why Facebook and all the other ones can live, because otherwise they would be sued the moment somebody says something that's racist or whatever. But the problem is that the extension of that law is, as I understand it, is that the payment card providers, if used on a platform like OnlyFans or whatever, come to the point where, let's take OnlyFans just an example. Let's say that you have an OnlyFans account with a victim who has been sex trafficked there and photographed by whoever, and they put that up. Then that's an OnlyFans sex trafficking violence thing. But the American Senate or Congress would be able to shut down Visa or MasterCard because people would use that card to pay for service that involves sex trafficking. Which, of course, is why Visa and MasterCard and the other payment providers are very, very careful on not doing anything that could be sex trafficking. And apparently, in their mind, porn or things related to porn could be sex trafficking. So they do not want that on their platforms. And I understand Meta. Imagine Meta could be closed if somebody posted something with sex trafficking. I wouldn't take that risk if I was Meta. I get it. I wouldn't take that risk if I was Patreon and you rely on subscriptions or OnlyFans for that matter from people who pay with MasterCard or Visa or whatever, because that will basically be the end of your platform. So I think that's a part of it. And I think one of the big problems with art nudes and artistic depiction of the body, so to speak, is that the platforms are afraid that their advertisers will basically leave them if they post things where an advertisement could end up next to a picture of a nude woman, because that's a massive problem in the US because of their like puritanical ways of looking at society. I think those things are kind of understandable. I don't know how to get around all these weird rules. I don't think there's any easy way back from it, but that's my understanding, at least for the background of how things are. Do I like it? No, I think it's horrible.
I read an article that you wrote called Empowerment and Photographers, and you said that it's such a pity that society in general scorns nudity as it really represses many women, and it makes them hide their bodies away and thus makes them think everyone else in the media is beautiful, but they themselves are not. Can you elaborate on this?
I don't think anybody who intimately knows a woman, and I don't think it matters where in the world you are and how you are, that women are very self-critical. They will always compare themselves with other people, and they will sort of try and judge whether they are worthy material for marriage or finding a good partner or whatever. And I think that goes back to all the biology and how we work as a sex. The women's job will be to raise kids, but that also means they need to be able to attract the best possible donor of genes. And of course, the best donor of genes will be most interested in people who are the prime species of women, so to speak. That's kind of like the selection idea, I think, that goes behind most women. But also the way advertising works is that it's very hard to be a woman if you have wrinkles, because who have wrinkles, you don't see them in advertising. But you can buy this product that will help you get rid of your wrinkles, or you can have some Botox, or you can have surgery, you can have all these things. So there's a lot of commercial pressure on women, and much more than we men ever see because we just ignore it. But there's a lot of pressure on women to be beautiful and look awesome. And that has a lot of effect on things. If we take the censorship part of it, men, I believe, won the right to go topless in 1922 something in the state of New York. They were the first guys who actually had non-full bathing suits on, and they somehow won a legal battle, and that was okay. And since then, it's kind of been okay for men to be topless on beaches. But I think if I was a 14-year-old girl and I look at Instagram and I see all these men who are like topless, flexing their abs or whatever, biceps, and they can be topless, you can see their nipples. But every time you see a female nipple, that's wrong somehow and needs to be censored. If you are told constantly by both society, but also your parents and your people around you that if you're a decent woman, you cannot show yourself naked, you should not do that because nice girls don't do this. And then you still have this opposing thing where you're like, okay, why can the men do it when I can't do it? And then you have this thing where you want to look great. You want to figure out where you are in sort of the social hierarchy, which is very common among women from a very young age. You have a recipe for disaster, basically. And I think banning their ability to actually show their body is not a good thing. And it will impact their self-feeling and what they do. That, of course, by extension means it's easier to sell home gym workout stuff and facial cream and butt lifters or whatever you have. And maybe that's the whole goal of it, to increase advertising, because that gives more advertising revenues for Meta or whatever. But it's a very cynical world if you take that view. I don't think it's a wrong view, but it is a very cynical way of looking at it.
I mean, you've had several Instagram accounts, like very large accounts, with some with over 100,000 followers. I didn't even need to research this because I've been following you for quite a few years and jumping around following those accounts and trying to keep up with it. You'll disappear and then reappear in another form. Like, how did all of this constant account deleting affect your work and like your progress as an artist?
It certainly did, because you lose touch with a lot of people that you know. Obviously, having a lot of followers have some great perks. It's much easier to find models, because in the good day before my first really big account was deleted, I would get 20 weekly requests from models to shoot with me, which is obviously ludicrous because there's no way I can do that. But it's fine. It gives you a fantastic tool to have a widespread connection with people you otherwise wouldn't have. And losing an account like that, of course, will impact the reach you have, because then basically you start again from scratch. My current account, called commando.art, is nearing 10,000, but I'm shadow banned in any which way. So it will never grow beyond anything substantial. It's just the way it is. I basically couldn't post, I would say, any of the pictures I create and get away with it on Instagram. So I could probably unshadow ban myself if I just deleted everything and left my portrait there. But then if I don't show my art, I don't care about showing myself. But if I don't show the art I create, what's the point of it? So I've sort of taken the stance of saying, okay, I'm going to stay well within their guidelines as I see and understand them. The current AI model doesn't agree with that because it keeps removing pictures. And then when I contested, they put it back. I had 40 such pictures in the last month or so. So it's a daily occurrence of having to reclaim that. But losing the account is not just about losing the followers. It's about losing contact and conversations with a lot of people who are friends and colleagues. And of course, the problem is once you lose that, how do you reconnect with people? Because it's not just on my end, it's also on the other ends. I know a model that known her online for 7-8 years. She's called Clara Renee. I met her for the first time in life in April, and she's now, I think, on her 18th account, which is ludicrous. I know other people who are up at the same count, and they just keep getting deleted for whatever reason. What I see on their accounts does not go against the rules. So either they are mass targeted by people who just does it with a malicious intent. That happens. There are bot ways of basically having people deleted if you really want to. Or it's just the algorithms they run that does not like women doing what they do and being semi-naked or having opinions on sexuality or their body. If you look at it from the outside, it seems that women are not allowed to make money on their body, but men are, which is a really odd way of life.
Yeah, it's very unfair and imbalanced way of organizing things. Something that as I've been doing this, I've slowly been realizing that imbalance and trying to understand the reasons why. When you first lost that large account, the moment you realized you lost it, like, how did you feel? Like, something you built up over such a long period of time that had so much value to you. Like, what did that feeling feel like to realize that had gone?
Intense sadness and fear of injustice, basically. It took a large emotional toll on me because I did seriously lose contact with thousands of people I had really good connections with. And I have no easy way of reconnecting with otherwise. So that took an intense toll. And it also has put me on a different path because I was very diligent on sharing my things, but also sharing. I mean, one of the perks of having a large account is that you have a very large reach around the world, which means that I could sort of try and help people understand my view of the world. So, for instance, if I post a nude, obviously still everything was censored. But if I post a nude of a woman and somebody would reply with 10 dog tongues and some eggplants, I would basically call them out in public on the comments and says, explain this comment to me, because this looks like you want to lick the model and stuff it with an eggplant. Is that your intention? That, and just please bear in mind that you have a human being sit on the other end, and if she reads it that way, she will feel that she is basically a piece of meat that you would like to fuck. And is that really what you want to convey and put across? So I did stuff like that, which markedly changed the tone and the conversations we could have online, because we got rid of all the ridiculous male bullshit in most cases. And I found that to be much more efficient than just blocking people or holding them off, because those are my morals. I feel I still do that. I would never comment anything on any picture I see online that I wouldn't say to the face of a woman at a pub. So I would never say anything that would give me a black eye if I was sitting next to the woman. Why would I? That's not the way I commence myself. And I think that's one of the travesties of social media. People tend to forget that there are people at the other end, and they tend to have a very rude way of commenting, or non-thoughtful, if you put it that way. That was something that I had a lot of benefit from. So basically, after I lost the account, I took the stance that I would never again in the same way involve myself emotionally in having that, because having anything online means you don't have it. You don't own your followers. You don't own your followers on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or anything. Anybody could take it away tomorrow. And it's happened. I mean, a lot of people lost their accounts, not just because of nudity, but also some because of spam. And you're like, so if you refer to your blog post or whatever, they will sometimes remove your post on Facebook. A lot of Twitter accounts were deleted because they had opposition against the corona vaccination back in the day, COVID vaccination. Right or wrong, I don't care. But the problem is when you silence people with an opinion different from your own, then you have this problem that you have a class of people in the world who have the right opinions, which is great when you agree with them. But it's not great when you're at the other end of the shotgun. And they can basically take anything away you have online in a second.
From what you were just saying as well, like your reach and your challenging people, that was having a positive impact on the way people were looking at, in this instance, art, nude photography, and digesting it differently and talking about it in a more educated way. And when you're trying to do something positive in that area, like what sort of impact do you think that has on society? Because it's not just you. I suppose when you take the whole collection of the people that are trying to have this positive impact when it comes to art, nude photography, and showcase this as art, when you start to take those people out as a collective from other people being able to engage with their work, what impact do you think that has?
It definitely has a negative impact, especially for women, because when you have men who sort of all the beauty and elegance that can be in an art form and remove those or the voices from society, you will only have the predominant things left, which is basically porn. So there's a predisposition in most people from, if you do anything that's nude, it's kind of smart. And I've been playing into that for a long time. When you go to a party somewhere and you get sit next to a lady somewhere, and inevitably one of the quick questions is, oh, so what do you do? And then I would normally say, I photograph naked women. And then there will be like an uncomfortable silence and people really know what to do, and they would look to the next guy on the other side of their hand. And after a while, they would go back and say, so what kind of pictures? And they say, I can show you on my Instagram if you want to see them. I showed them and they're like, wow, these are not even sleazy. And you're like, not even sleazy? So your assumption is that nudity is by default sleazy. So most people's assumption is that nudity is porn. Perhaps it's because most people only see nude people when they are in bed or about to have sex with them. But that's discarding all of art's history. That's discarding everything for the last 30,000 years. It's the Renaissance. It's even all the art in churches. There's so many nudity in these things. Nudity has always in art history been considered one of the more popular subjects of everything. And they've understood that there's an attraction in that, so you couldn't really just disregard that. Maybe you shouldn't feel it. You should feel non-sexually attracted to women, because that's wrong. You desire your next or whatever. But it's disregarding all of art history and just saying, oh, but this is photographs. So photographs is different. That's not art. And I think that's a travesty. Then you have the feeling that all nudity ends up being porn in most people's minds if they don't have the examples and the voices who tell them otherwise.
I saw that you posted on your Patreon a series of 3 images called Cancelled. And these were images that you kind of mentioned had a large backlash due to the interpretation of the images along the grounds of what the people looking were interpreting as like issues of race, balance of race, or religion, like religious connotations. Can you tell me more about this experience and how you handled the backlash to your work?
I don't know why. I don't understand the part about canceling people. When I meet people I disagree with, I tend to go into them and say, listen, I don't understand this. I disagree with you, which is fine. I think we should be able to have different meanings. And I don't understand your basis of having whatever feeling, opinion about what you do. So explain it to me. Maybe you're right. Then maybe I will alter my perception of how things are, but explain it to me. That's it. And that's the way I approach most things in life. I want my opinion to be altered because then I learn something new. That gives me a better view on how everything works in the world. On these 3 occasions, I had one more. It turns out to be mob mentality and a flame war, because you cannot argue with most of the time 200, 300, 400 people online at the same time. They will just hammer you with questions. You can answer anything in written form. By the time you've answered one of them, there will be like 50 other questions who will take offense to any other comment you've done or any other work you've done. So it definitely, that's it. Again, back to the censorship part. When you want to silence other people's words or works, it's because you feel that they oppose your view of the world, and your view of the world is the only one that's right. So in my opinion, it stems from an insecurity and this idea that there's only one thing that's right. One of the pictures that was really badly taken on was I had 3 models in the studio that day. There was 2 dark-skinned ones and 1 white. And it's a little complicated setup because one of the models brought the white model without my knowledge initially to the studio. Then we had the other dark model, which is Danish model, come in later. So I a little bit had the challenge of saying, okay, do I cancel this? Do I throw out one model who I all of a sudden had and didn't know I would have and should will? Do we work something out and what? And I started sort of just working it out and trying to figure it out. When the other model arrived, we tried different things. And one of the things we did was like a setup where we had the white woman in the middle and the 2 other ones on the sides, but there was a height difference. So I had the 2 black women kneel. I was thinking kind of like a more dominant look because the white woman was like a black-haired or dark-haired girl and like really thin, skinny. And the other 2 were kind of voluptuous a little bit more and dark-skinned. But the picture in the end, I thought was great. It had like a little bit of sexual tension of like dominatrix and some not slave girls, but submissive girls. But the take was that obviously this was the white ruler who was having slave girls in the black community, especially in the US. And they were very opposed to doing this during, I think, Black Awareness Week or whatever. Something I had no idea was there. And I don't really care either. And it really prompted me to think about what happened in that respect, because it basically means that there are some conversations we can't have. So I could do this picture if we had a black woman standing in the middle above the other ones. I could probably not have done it with a man in the middle and the 2 women submissive at the bottom, because that would again be a man dominating women, and you're not allowed to do that either. You could have it like a woman standing above 2 men, but not if the men were black, because that would have the same connotation. I'm just thinking, okay, so if you set something up with some kind of sexual dynamic, there's apparently a lot of things in the world which you're not allowed to do, because for some people in the world, they have connotations. And I understand their reference to slavery and stuff. It's just not something that even entered my mind. It never entered the mind of any of the girls either, not when we saw the picture afterwards. Only when we got completely hammered online by having done it. you can explain that to people, and people were scrutinizing my entire Instagram, and sort of I got off the hook, if you should call it that, because I didn't have anything other racist pictures on my profile, and they consider this really badly racist. I don't in any way consider myself racist. But I think from an artist's point of view, it becomes difficult if you have a lot of things you can't or not allowed to talk about. Because if we do this by extension and you bring church into it, you could say, yes, but the church do not like nudity because that can lead people astray and have them have impure thoughts. So we better ban nudity as well. And you can do that with all the political things or all the things you don't like as the ruling class. So again, I have no problem with people hating the picture. I have no problem with them objecting and finding it insensitive. That's totally fine. The problem is if I have to change what I do so it cannot be offensive to anybody anywhere, I basically can't do anything. Because some of the things I do, some of the views I have will, of course, be offensive to somebody somewhere. That becomes a very narrow limitation on what you can do for artful purposes. I find that bad, but what I find really bad is that you have a lot of people who feel that this is something that needs to be stopped, and we need to close the people down who do these things without trying to understand what happens. And obviously, yes, there are people who are misogynistic and who are racist and who are all these things. But I think it's very hard if you create something that some people interpret in a certain way, that you decide that that's the only right way of doing it. I think that becomes a dangerous course for art.
It's perhaps a more intelligent approach to focus on the intention of the artist in those instances, as opposed to, and being self-aware enough to realize that your personal interpretation is not necessarily the objective one. I mean, it reminds me of a situation in Manchester Art Gallery where I'm from, where there was a picture that William Waterhouse painted where it was of a man leaning down into a pond where there were some women, and he was like reaching into the pond, and there was like a series of, I don't know, it was like 10 nude women in this pond. It's a very old painting, but there's a curator that was hired, and she was attempting to remove the painting because she felt that in this day and age it wasn't appropriate to have a man in this sort of position with nude women around him, like prominently in the art gallery. But it's one that the local people were very proud of, and it's been well known that it's like been in the gallery for a long time. So when she did this, there was a massive uproar, and she ended up losing her job because so many people protested against it and against the removal of something, an interpretation by the curator to remove such a kind of prized painting, that it remained. But they did do a different kind of exhibition involving that painting and others that was about interpretation of paintings and art, which I felt was a much more intelligent way of looking at these challenges, as opposed to just attempting to remove what's a very important painting in art history and force your interpretation onto the situation. I was very surprised at that point that came from the curator.
I think this falls in line with some of the things that goes on in both US. We had some in Denmark as well, where somebody wants to pull down some statues because it turns out that these guys of statues used to have slaves, or they used to be really bad guys or whatever. And I think it reminds me a little bit about Stalin, where you have like a cabinet or government, and if you at some point don't like anybody, you kill them, and then you erase them from the photographs, because then nobody will remember them. And I don't think that's the correct way of approaching things like this. It's undoubtedly, we have a lot of historical figures in the UK, in Denmark, in the US, who by current norms are real assholes and has been behaving in bad ways and done horrible things for sure. Does that mean we should try and remove the memories of them or the historical significance they also had? I mean, we had a Danish king once who got like half the male or a third of the male population killed because he wanted some riches by invading Germany. But he also built some of the most beautiful buildings in Denmark. So it's a little on-off. I think it's much more reasonable in that respect to say, let's leave the stuff there because it is a part of history. It's been there for a lot of years, so it's part of our culture. Let's put up an explanation that explains why this is controversial and what this guy also did, because then you get a more nuanced picture of what's really going on. And I think that's pretty much where we started in that. I think the conversations are important. I think it's important to be able to talk about anything in a civilized way and learn other people's points of view, because we live in a very diverse world, and we live in a place where there are a lot of differences between people in both regard to cultural backgrounds, money, jobs, occupation, religion, all sorts of other things. But we can all access each other within a second through social media or email or whatever. So I think we need to adopt a way where we try to build more understanding of other points of view than just try and say, no, I'm right and you're wrong.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And to come back to your work to finish, I read that you said that the trick to valuable photography is that it has to come from the heart. And I found this to be quite a touching statement. What does it mean?
It has to reflect who you are. There's currently 8.1 billion people on the planet currently, I think. And there's one thing we all have going for us as individuals. And that is we are all a little bit unique. We had a different upbringing. We have a different school period. We have different interests. We have different ways of, based on that, of viewing the world. And I think if we bring that across in whatever art form we sort of dwell in, we can create something that's authentic and that's unique. And that's kind of what I mean by doing it by the heart. The problem is that you can really only be unique if you're yourself, because everybody else is taken. Everybody else is everybody else. They have different upbringing. So if you try to be like them, what you're really trying to do is be not yourself. And I think that's the problem. You need to embrace who you are and what you are, and then work on that. That'll be an authentic way of bringing things into existence that is uniquely you. There's an American music producer called Rick Rubin, who's a fantastic guy. One of the founders of Beastie Boys and a music producer, has been producing things for everybody. He's amazing. He just wrote a book about creativity. And I think one of the statements I remember vividly from that book is that when you create art, you shouldn't think of it as art. You should think of it as a diary entry. You write something in your diary, and that reflects who you are right now, what you like right now. You shouldn't in any way skew that to please other people because you think it will be better commercially to do this and that. It's a diary entry. Then you can choose to publish it or do whatever. But when you create it, you need to create it so it feels right to you, like you would if you wrote in a diary. I mean, if you wrote a diary, presumably, unless you show it to other people, you're the only one who's gonna watch it. So you would not have to rewrite that in another format or another form to make it look better. You write whatever thoughts you have. I think that's a very sound way of approaching it. So create things you like the way you like them. And thinking back, that's what happened to me, because as an advertising photographer, I was good. I made money. Nobody knew who I was outside of the business, because in advertising, nobody puts your credit or byline on. That only happens in editorial photography. But when I started shooting nudes, I basically, to get away from the commercial aspects, I sort of had a mantra that said, I want to create unsellable pictures. And what I meant by that was I wanted to create something that did not have a commercial basis, because I could possibly have shot from Playboy or editorial magazines. I had skill for it for sure. I shot a lot of fashion and stuff. It's just, if I started shooting for, say, Playboy, I would have to adopt the style that is inherent in Playboy and shoot the angles they want and portray the women in the way that is suitable for Playboy. But I wanted to portray the women in the way I thought they should be portrayed. And basically, that's where my Instagram blew up and ended up becoming really big, because I had a lot of followers who presumably saw something that they did not see everywhere else, where possibly a lot of other people just did the same things as many other people. So they saw a certain quality in it, but I believe they saw uniqueness and possibly authenticity in what I create, because I try to not please anybody else except myself. I think that's the most authentic way you can work.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice way to end the podcast as well, to focus on doing genuine work that's true to you. And on Art versus the Algorithm, we've got a tradition with my very final question. If you don't mind, I want you to pick a body part from a list, and each corresponds to a question. Once I've asked you that question, I'll ask you to fill in the gap with your own question. The previous questions have been written by my previous guests, so they're all anonymous though, so I won't be revealing who asked them. But you can fill it in with a question of your own, which is fun or deadly serious for a future guest to answer. So essentially, I want you to pick from either eyes, legs, bum, skin, or hips.
Let's go hips.
So hips. Is there a piece of art or artist that inspired you on your journey? Can you describe any specific image and what it means to you?
There are countless photographs, obviously. I think some of my first photographic interests, I've always been attracted to women. So one of my first photographic interests would be probably some of Helmut Newton's work. But I have so many countless others from so many different masters in photography. And I think basically everything you've seen that you attach to will somehow help inspire you. But I would like to take it into a complete different art form. I'm even going to switch genders on you. I would say that works like Michelangelo's David, the statue in Florence, is probably one of the most perfect things I've ever seen depicting a human body. So you have something which is cut out of a massive or several massive chunks of marble, which is sculpted to perfection to resemble a prime example of a human body at its peak capability. And I think watching that has had some influence in how I approach especially sculptural images, because I'm super interested in anatomy, how it works. And I think that comes across, especially if you see some of the work I do on dancers. That is one work of art that has had an influence in everything I do. And maybe, very possibly, there's a lot of other sculptures that come into that. But that's the first one that comes to mind. And I think that is a profound artwork. And it's just done to perfection or something close to it, even to the point where it's made proportionally so because it's so massive. Michelangelo changed the proportions so it looks more right from where you watch it, because otherwise there will be too much skewing of perspective. And I think that is so profound, and it shows such profound tradesmanship, which is almost incomprehensible even to many artists today.
Thank you so much for answering that question, and for also taking the time today to chat to me on Art versus the Algorithm. It's been really insightful to chat to you, and I've definitely learned a lot. And also thank you for creating such beautiful and inspiring work so consistently over the years that I've been following you and sharing it with everybody. I've been continually inspired by your work, and following it has pushed me forward as a photographer, but I'm sure it's also pushed countless others forward. So yeah, I really thank you for that. And also it's been such a pleasure to talk to you.
Art versus the Algorithm. So, which side are you on? You've been listening to Art versus the Algorithm, hosted and produced by Will Preisner, music by Ned Wolfgang Kelly, voiceover by Alexia Kombu.